Hello, everyone, and good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast, and good morning for those of you joining us elsewhere. My name is Beth Boland. I am the immediate past chair of the New England chapter of NACD and a current board member of NACD. Thanks so much for joining us for this excellent program that I know will be of great interest. Welcome. I see folks chiming in from around the United States. We love having folks from other chapters and from other areas of the country join us. And what a great program this is going to be. Accelerating growth through AI and innovation. I know that this is the topic on everybody's mind, and we have some great speakers today to help illuminate that subject for us from this different prism. Couple of logistical issues before we go into the program. First of all, please mute. If you are not already on mute, please mute yourself. Second of all, for those of you who want credits, please make sure that your name is located on your screen so that we can take down your name and give you due credit. Finally, NACD and the NACD chapter network organizations are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations dedicated to providing directors with the opportunity to discuss timely governance oversight practices. The views of the speakers and the audience are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of NACD. Now, before we get started with the speakers, I do want to acknowledge our sponsors. This is the list of our New England chapter sponsors. Most of them have been with us for years and years. We are so grateful to them, and without their support, we could not bring great programs like this to you. So we are very, very grateful to those sponsors. And in particular, we are highlighting a special premier partner, PwC. PwC has been with us for years. They provide great thought leadership, great content, great speakers for our programs, and we are very, very grateful for PwC and that partnership. I also want to welcome our first-time attendees. Thank you so much for joining our program. I hope that you all get a great taste of what NACD does and what the New England chapter does in particular, and that you come back to future programs. And we do encourage not only our first-time attendees, but all of our attendees to put your questions in the chat function and also just comments. Lots of times the best programs that we have are the ones that not only have great content from our speakers, but also from our audience participants as well. So with that, I kick it off to our great moderator. Well, actually, before that, I want to thank a number of folks who brought us today's program. Ellen Ridgestone, board member and our program chair, Deb Rosenthal and Larissa Rivetto, and Laura Miluski, who are on the NACD staff. Thank you so much for all you do to bring these great programs to our members. Now it's my pleasure to introduce this program's moderator, Ellen Rubin. She is the operating partner at Glassing Wing Ventures and an experienced independent board member on her own with decades of experience as a technology entrepreneur, CEO, and investor. She sits on the board of Allegion, a leading provider of security and access solutions, and we know that she is a fantastic and very valued board member on that board. So with that, I'll kick it over to Ellen.
Thanks so much, Beth, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's very cool seeing everybody saying hello from around the country. So I have an outstanding panel here. I'm really honored to get to have some time with them today. Joining us is Bill Meaney, who has been president and CEO of Iron Mountain, a global information management services company, since 2013. He is a member of the Asia Business Council, the Council on Foreign Relations, and also serves on the board of State Street Corporation. So hi, Bill. Rob Oshana is SVP of Software and Digital Platforms at Analog Devices, a semiconductor company, where he's responsible for software development, digital hardware, AI and machine learning, and IT. So huge, broad range, which I know is going to be very valuable for today's discussion. And last but not least is Rudina Cesari, who is the founder and managing partner at Glasswing Ventures, a leading early stage VC firm that invests in the application of AI and frontier technology to enterprise and cybersecurity markets, and also my colleague. Hi, Rudina. Rudina is also on multiple private and public boards, including M&T Bank and MSC Industrial. So I'm very excited to have all of you. And just a quick note that Rudina had an emergency issue come up and she will unfortunately need to leave a few minutes early, but we will continue the conversation even after she leaves, and I'll allow as much time as possible for questions from the audience. To kick things off a little bit, so AI, where to start? You know, it's the topic every minute of every day. But for the purposes of today's conversation, what we really want to do is not focus on hype, not focus on people's fears and nervousness about, you know, this enormous technology transition that's happening, but really focus on concrete, real results in business and what's happening in businesses that we're all experienced with, familiar with, engaging with in our day to day. Beyond pilots, and looking to see what is actually happening in terms of concrete and real results that we can compare and think about in terms of future growth. So although we will talk briefly about risk and security and compliance and some of those issues, which of course have to go hand in hand, the focus for today is on growth, opportunity, and efficiency, and how boards should think about their input and their responsibility and enablement for the teams and the companies that they're working with. So in order to get going, let me start this conversation off. Let's go right to some concrete results. So what would be really great is if everybody can just give a couple of one or two examples of what you're seeing in your businesses and on your boards that has real value in terms of revenue growth, margin expansion, customer experience, customer differentiation. So Rob, can we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, we have seen results in how we build microprocessors through our factory. So the digital design process we've enhanced with AI, how quickly we can build and deploy a digital device. That we're seeing very concrete results there and in our products. So the microprocessors that we deliver to customers, for example, advanced hearing aids, we're putting AI models into these products that are driven by advanced AI models that allow us to, for example, zone in on particular people talking, you know, and kind of bubble sound ranges so that we can enhance the hearing. So yeah, it's showing up in our products and how we build products.
That's great. Rudina, you want to go next?
Sure. I think the way I'd frame the answer for me is 2025, we saw a lot of experimentation around LLMs and foundation models, or for what would commonly be known as OpenAI's ChatGPT and others, particularly around the interface or how customers and consumers interact with technology in general. This year, we're actually seeing real adoption, both at the revenue level, i.e., how can you be more productive and get to higher revenue with the same resources, or same revenue with fewer resources, but also bottom line. So I will give two examples. At Glasswing, we have a portfolio company called Veris, and they're optimizing the MRO inventory management, which is a $80 billion a year hard dollar waste. What they are doing is actually giving full visibility on the management of inventory around optimization of pricing and price discovery, but also just getting clarity through the technology stack as to what you actually have in inventory versus what is happening, what your system of record says, whether it's online or offline. That's fairly basic, but high impact. Another example would be in the pharmaceutical and sort of prescription fulfillment space. We have a company called Acefa that's going after prescription fulfillment workflows. As a side note, in the current era of AI adoption, AI can really be uniquely sort of advantageous in automating workflows. So those guys are tying together the multitude of software that's in play from when the doctor writes a prescription to when the patient picks up the medication. And again, a tens of billions a year wasted problem that can now be recovered.
Thanks. Bill, tell us about how things look from Iron Mountain or from some of the boards that you're on.
Okay, well, thanks, and thanks for including me in today's discussion. I think I would talk about from an Iron Mountain standpoint, kind of in two different bits. So Iron Mountain is probably most of you know, the ubiquitous box of documents that you see, around the globe in the 61 countries that we operate in. But I would say over the last 13 years, we've been going through our own transformation. So part of that was quite visible when we were the AI ML Partner of the Year of Google about almost 8 years ago, as when we started building a lot of the technology internally. We own the IP, but we built it with the help of Google at the time, and now have deployed that across customers. So on the offense, if you will, in terms of what we're able to do with customers beyond information storage of analog data, is we're now helping our customers really think about information management with both analog and natively born or digital information, using that platform, which is cloud native across all three major cloud platforms around the globe. If you think about what that has done in terms of Iron Mountain is at the beginning of this journey in terms of building out that product, is our digital business was effectively a scanning business, which was roughly, let's say, less than $30 million at the time. It's now hundreds of millions of dollars of annual revenue. A big chunk of that is recurring revenue, because now we'll be able to go into our customers with a platform that helps them manage both their analog and their digital data as they go forward. So we took our business, which, as I said, was low tens of millions, into hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue by adding value to our customers across a number of issues around information management. Sometimes it's about compliance, sometimes it's about cost reduction, and sometimes it's about revenue growth. Internally, what we're doing is, you always have to make sure you're not the cobbler's kids, who don't have shoes. So internally, we've also applied that same AI mindset. And when you think about it, a lot of people, when they say transformation, is they're thinking about a diet rather than a lifestyle. And what we've decided to do is lean in hard in terms of transformation, and it really is a lifestyle for the business. And first and foremost is the AI tools that we built and that we partner with companies that have built, really give you an opportunity to think about transformation in a truly transformative way. And the thing I would encourage folks to think about is, don't think about a 5% cost reduction, think of a 35% cost reduction. And for instance, with our teams this year, we've asked them in some of our back office areas, is how do they actually bypass or remove the enterprise software that we're already reliant in some of those back office operations. Now, we were probably a little bit of a fortune teller, because we said this at the end of last year, and we all saw what happened in the markets last week about enterprise software companies. Just to be clear, I don't think enterprise software is dead. But what we've said to folks internally, when you're using these tools and you think about 35% cost reduction or productivity improvement rather than 5%, what you don't want to do is be constrained by the enterprise software module that's sitting in the middle of that process. And with the new AI tools, it allows you to think completely differently and really optimize for that, that gold standard of straight through processing in virtually all your back office operations. So, for sure, you have to have a different mindset. You can't have an incremental mindset, and you have to go back to first principles on saying, I want to have a straight through, efficient process in whatever area that you're looking at. And I think with some of the, the revolution in some of the computer science that's led to this big sprint of what we have available for AI tools, and a big part, fueled by the level of compute power that we're able to actually marshal around the globe now, is a real opportunity, at least for us as a company. And if you put it all together, I mean, just us as a company over the last 10 years, we've added over 800 basis points in terms of our EBITDA margin as a result.
That's awesome. And Rob, when we had a prep call, a couple of weeks ago, and you were talking about the need to look at not only the efficiency side of this story, but also the top line growth side of the story. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think a lot of the discussion for AI so far has been streamlining and operational and stuff, which is critically important, and in some ways the most obvious thing to do first. But for you, how does it play out in terms of kind of like the balance between top line and bottom line?
Yeah, as far as top line, some of the areas where we focus in our business, industrial, for example, robotics, automotive, consumer, healthcare, data center, aerospace and defense, What we look for is opportunities to innovate and differentiate with AI technology, and when we interface with our customers, sometimes they're not even really sure how to leverage AI to solve their problems. They kind of know about it, but they don't really know how to apply it and optimize it for their specific application. So what we're finding is that we go in with some pretty good ideas of how to solve customer problems, but it may or may not require AI, and that requires a discussion backwards and forwards with customers. What we're seeing is that in certain of our verticals, for example, automotive, we're seeing a lot of opportunity to leverage AI in areas like in-cabin experience, controlling sound, for example, a lot in AMR, autonomous mobile robots. They're seeing a lot of growth there, driven by new ways of leveraging AI to, for example, leverage time of flight sensors to navigate a factory floor faster than in the past. So the use cases where we focus, we're seeing most of them can leverage AI to drive additional revenue opportunity. And the way we're monetizing that is through our digital processors, our analog signal chains, our digital processors, but also the software, the models themselves. The way we differentiate there and drive some of this top line growth is with the innovative data that we collect from our signal chains, our analog signal chains. We create those models with that innovative data and then provide that as a solution to our customers. And that's driving growth across most of our verticals, this type of an approach.
That's awesome. And are there, big goals in terms of how fast the growth could accelerate, like relative to, I mean, obviously nothing that can't be shared, but like when you think about it, Bill was talking a little bit more about like, don't think 5%, think 30%. When you think top line growth, what kind of multiple are you thinking about or percent growth?
Yeah, so for a company, we're seeing growth. It varies by vertical. Consumer, much shorter term. Automotive, obviously, the cycles there are much longer. So aggregate, when you roll it up, it's on the top line 10%, and that'll increase going out as we get some of our products into more, like for example, into these areas like automotive. And then on the bottom line, obviously the efficiency, we already talked about that, but we're seeing kind of like what Bill said, we're thinking big, not just incremental percentage improved savings, but in the 30+% in some of our design practices leveraging AI.
That's awesome. And Regina, you see across a lot of different industries and a lot of different size customers. So how does that relate to what you're experiencing?
Well, I'm going to try to challenge Bill and Rob on the definition of what's sort of dare to dream. So at Glasswing, we have always done AI companies companies are truly AI native, not just the wrappers with LLMs. And it's fascinating to watch because companies that we invested circa 2018, the product was AI native, the go-to-market, the developer and tech stack was, software as we would have all known. And so in many ways, they're protected from what's going on in the public markets, but still how they were built reflected that era. In the last two funds, we've really gone AI native, not just on the product or our portfolio companies, I should say, but also in how they have built the business. And I'm going to share one data point, which continues to sort of surprise me. So if one took lines of code, as imperfect as it may be, as a proxy for growth, one of our more scaled companies, so in the tens of millions of revenue, had a team of about 25 engineers over 5 years, generated about 5 million lines of code. One of our more recent companies, so 6 months old investment, 9 months that the company has been around, with 5 developers, has generated almost 2 million lines of code. I share that to make the point around productivity. Our best estimate is that at least on the technology side, you should see 8x productivity. So my tongue-in-cheek comment on challenging Rob and Bill, but either in reducing the costs or in getting more output. The same goes for every side of the business, the revenue impact as well as the cost impact. The real question, though, I tied back to what are we automating and for what purpose? the term AI is very broadly used. I actually teach a class at HBS where I talk about the false indication of interest. You call anyone and you tell them you have an AI initiative, they will take the call, whether they want to buy from you or not, because there is this pressure around AI. AI should really lead to outcomes. So what it has done for us is enabled us to evaluate businesses and on the basis of outcomes, not just sort of investments, because there is very, very little loyalty to technologies today. In particular, consumers have started to use this term with promiscuity of AI users, because one day they're using ChatGPT or OpenAI, the next day is Cursor, the next day is something else. It's which business or which tools are giving them the best outcomes. And this vendor lock-in concept, at least in this transitional time, is a little bit diminished.
Agreed. So I'm going to just kind of bring this all together. Like, Bill, when thinking now with your board hat for a second, what is it that boards, in your experience, sometimes are too limited, or there's a misconception about AI that you think that they should rethink? Like, what's for all the people who are on this call, like, what would you say to them, in terms of as they're thinking about AI in their board roles?
Well, I think first I always kind of start with what's the role of a director, and I think you always need to keep the lens that it's nose in, hands out, right? So whatever, because I mean, this is a super interesting topic. A lot of us who are directors also have day jobs. So if we're not careful, we kind of bring that day job with us into the boardroom. So I would say, first, you need to kind of keep that clear, because we're all curious human beings, and it's a super interesting topic, not just in terms of the technology, but what you can get from the technology when you apply it. So I think that there's kind of a couple things. One is, I do think, to make sure that people don't have an incremental mindset in the boardroom in terms of when they see strategies and how the company is leaning into AI, to make sure the company is being bold enough. And it isn't just, chasing for productivity's sake, but it's to make sure that you're future-proofing the business. So for instance, India is the only place that reports directly to me, because India is a place which it takes competition to the Olympics, right? If you want to be an Olympic athlete, you need to train against the best. And India is a market which is really hard, but it's really hard because that product market fit is really tight, right? So I think, as a director, you want to make sure that the company is not incrementalizing themselves into a non-competitive position. In other words, thinking 3 years out, where is the market going to be? Where's the competition going to be? To make sure you're future-proofing both your cost base and your products. The other thing, though, which I think is kind of a thing that we always, when we talk about AI, I think many times we focus on the risk. And for sure, AI is creating a arms race and risk, right? First of all, the bad actors are using AI to try to get into our networks and, through phishing and spoofing. And we're all conscious of the fact to make sure that our data is not in large language models outside of our premises, so to speak. But the only thing I would ask the board, coming back to my first point, that boards keep in mind, is that they keep in their back of their mind also the risk associated with a counterfactual. What I mean of not leaning in aggressively to AI and what it can do with you, both with your customers, how you interact and build product for your customers, but also in terms of your competitive cost base. Because I think many times we get paralyzed by the risk, and we spend more time in the board meeting talking about the risk of the new technology rather than the risk of not embracing it. And so, just anecdotally, when I speak to the people in the military, first of all, the military leaders, at the top end of the pyramid, so to speak, the one thing that is a common thread in all the military leaders I know is the humility. So generally, they come into private industry, or they come into a group that I'm in, they say, we want to learn from you. 99 times out of 100, actually probably more like 7 nines, is I end up learning a lot. I don't think they got much out of it at all. And one of the things specifically in AI I find is the military understands the counterfactual of not leaning into AI. They understand the risk, because obviously national security data is only valuable if it's secure. But at the same time, through binoculars and periscopes, they see the counterfactual of not leaning in. And I think many times in industry, we don't fully assess the risk of not going harder and faster.
I totally agree with you. Diane, who always asks the good counterfactual questions in my experience, is asking, that damned MIT study that said that everybody's failing and there are no returns. And then she's like, but what about all this great stuff that you guys are describing? Why is there a disconnect there? So, Rudina, you want to jump in on that one?
Sure, happy to. Actually, both statements. Hello, Diane. She's a good friend. But both statements are true. The 95% failure actually is referencing large language models or Gen AI, and at the time, it's absolutely the case that they were very experimental and they were failing. Where we have seen true AI adoption, very interestingly, in the last, call it 2 to 3 years, driven by the hype around Gen AI, but at the enterprise level has been around classical machine learning. So it's really been around areas of AI that have been very well understood for the obvious reason of needing to explain and understand risk, cyber exposure data, what's entering the enterprise. So that we've seen a rise and in fact, some of the more successful projects have been in that regard. What at least I am seeing in early 26 is the rise of agents that are crisscrossing between traditional ML or classical ML and now some of the more cutting edge LLMs as honestly governance and not just board of directors, but management teams as well are getting more comfortable. So I would venture to say that 26, we're seeing a different kind of adoption beyond the experimental.
And Rob, did you want to jump in either about Diane's question or about the more general thing I was asking about, like what do boards get wrong on this topic?
Well, just on the study, on the MIT study, I read that too, and but I kind of
Yeah.
agree with Radina in some regards. It's kind of true and false. Our experience is, and I manage all the software in our company. As we learn how to use, first of all, I think LLMs are getting better, like Radina said, and there's a shakeout I think coming. For example, I believe for software at our company, we're gonna latch onto a specific LLM that we believe is the best for our software development. But we're also learning, just simple prompt engineering, and how it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out with these things. So just good prompt engineering by our software engineers, good training. They're becoming better and better at this, and the results are noticeably better. So when Radina said earlier about generating all this software, all this code. Yeah, but is it quality code? Or do you have to review it and fix it? So we're finding that through good training, good prompt engineering, the quality of the output is noticeably better, and it's a productivity improvement across our engineering teams. But it did take some collaboration, some balance, and training to get there. But now I think we're reaping those rewards.
That's awesome.
May I jump in, Ellen, for a second?
Of course, yeah.
So absolutely, I think this notion of vibe coding is both, by the way, for the broader audience, vibe coding is all the developers that are no longer sort of coding in the languages that we're familiar, but in fact are using prompts, which are really, plain English guidance using, ChatGPT and Claude and other tools to generate code. So it's a very different type of skill set. And to many who are authentic developers, a bit of a fake notion of, I could go in and type a prompt, but just for some level setting. I think what Rob said is absolutely true in terms of there is an adjustment. But that also means, and I think Bill, in his first answer to your question, references Ellen, I think we need to rethink how we're conducting business. Oftentimes in boards, when we say technology, the immediate instinct is to make it one with cybersecurity and the risk associated with it, and often fold it as a subcommittee under risk and audit. And sure, if that's how you want to govern, but actually this is an opportunity that you either jump on the bandwagon or you will wake up and someone has surpassed you. So for boards, the sense of urgency that needs to exist around, empires die slowly, they might die a little faster than one can imagine because of every facet of the business coming under potential for both for being attacked and for faster growth.
For sure. And so I feel that we want to spend like a minute about the risk and the guardrails and the things that we want to do. But, Bill, back to your comment about the counterfactual questions, right? Like there's definitely a sense of don't let that crush the discussion, right? And the opportunity that's here. Can we just go around really quickly and just sort of say, what is an appropriate level from a board perspective to ask for around risk, control, compliance that doesn't stifle innovation? What's the best way to find that balance in your experiences? Bill, do you want to go first?
Well, I think, yeah, we're probably in a little bit of a different situation than some of the folks because it's enforced on us. So we do so much for financial services across our business line that we have the honor and the privilege, so to speak, of being not regulated, but we are inspected by a thing called the FFIC, which is a combination of the Boston Fed, the FDIC, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. So we're supervised, not regulated. But you can imagine it's really because we're considered part of the critical infrastructure for financial services in the United States across our business lines. And you can imagine when before I came in, it was more about business continuity, just strength of the balance sheet, the operations, et cetera. Now you can imagine I'm not saying that isn't checked as well, but the main focus is around cybersecurity. So I think, I do think the board does have responsibility to make sure that the competitiveness of the company, in other words, you want to make sure your critical information is not exfiltrated from the company. And then the other thing is if you are using software to actually deliver products and services to your customers, you need to make sure that is secure because your brand's on the line, right? Before, if you're building motor cars, your brand is to make sure the tires don't fall. You software car product.
Bill, we're a little losing you. Sorry that we're having trouble.
Oh.
Yeah, you froze for a sec, Bill. Do you mind just saying your last sentence or two?
Yeah. So we have that
All right, we'll let Bill know that we're having a little trouble with his communication. Sorry about that, Bill. Rob, did you want to jump in for a sec in terms of some of the risk without stifling innovation question?
Yeah. The approach we're taking, we want to provide the ability of our engineers, for example, internally to create and innovate, but govern at the right level. So, for example, if an individual engineer wants to develop an agent to help him or her do something, create reports, things like that from their own email system, we provide a platform for that, and just go off and do it. Have fun, innovate. If you're developing an agent for, say, a team or an agent that may be deployed across the company, we then provide additional governance. We take these things in front of what we call a architecture review board, where we do have members of cyber, legal, and other architecture stakeholders, and we do a deeper review of the agent because we want to make sure that the data being accessed is not going to put us at risk, or legal or licensing or what have you. So as you go up and develop this agentic technology for broader kind of areas, if you will, from individual to team to company, we provide an increasing amount of governance. We believe that's the right balance to drive innovation, to move quickly, but also to protect the company for cyber risks, legal risks, licensing risks, and things like that. So that's kind of the approach we're taking.
Right, and Rudina, you're on the board of a bank, so tell us about that and what the balance is there. I'm sure it's very tricky.
Well, very similar. I think the bank is regulated as both, the banking arm, so the Fed, but also the wealth management side, so the SEC. And I think in general, the best practice here is, in addition to the guardrails that you have at this point well implemented around cybersecurity, one steps back and says, okay, what are the components in my AI output? Data, and models. So then you look at the data and sort of what is my data governance? What measures have I taken? I would be very shocked if there are any public enterprises that are not choosing to have the enterprise versions of whatever AI tools they are using. Many of them are actually creating their own hosting environments or their own private clouds just to ensure that some of the large models are not getting trained on their data, and as well as, the contractual representations that they get in the agreements. And then on the model side, same thing. What models am I using for what portion? And then at the end of the day, for those two, you need what's often referred to as human in the loop. I don't think any of us can just let AI do its thing without the ability to have oversight in critical parts of the process and or some degree of explainability. One thing I will share from an innovation point of view is that increasingly the newer models that are coming out and the newer techniques are both more efficient from a cloud and energy consumption point of view, but also increased effort around explainability because everyone understands the challenge of being able to, be held accountable. At the end of the day, if cybersecurity and how that industry has evolved gives us a somewhat of a roadmap for how AI governance will be addressed, I think it will be as important on if something goes wrong, how does one mitigate as much as what you have done beforehand. I mean, generally, I'm going to exaggerate a bit, but generally the issues, whether it's brand or regulatory around cyber attacks, have not been by the sheer fact that one entity, one enterprise got attacked. That's to be expected. Enterprises get attacked and actually, attacks succeed many, many times a year. It's really how you responded to it. And I think the same thing is going to happen from a risk perspective with AI.
Bill, welcome back. You were in the middle of saying some things about risk and guardrails and doing that without stifling innovation. Do you want to jump back into that topic?
Well, as I said, the only thing on our side, it's super important because if we sell an AI based product or our DXP platforms or our digital experience platform, for instance, is that it has to be bulletproof, right? Because our customers trust us with their data. But besides the FFIC, being supervised by the Boston Fed and the FDIC and OCC, we also, like when you sell into the federal government, we're required to get FedRAMP High classification on our products, or when we're selling into financial services, their CISO is at the table along with their CTO on vetting our equipment. So, but it is, it's an arms race right now in terms of the bad actors are improving their technology, but it's one thing that is super critical.
Right. Cops and robbers all over again, some more. So we're getting such great questions that I almost want to jump into some of these questions instead of what I was going to be asking you guys next. So there seems to be also a lot of interest in like readiness, right? Cultural issues about like, how do you know your organization is ready to propel AI forward from a cultural perspective, and data readiness, which are like, without those things, you can be all excited as much as you want, but how do you actually make sure that those are in the right place to move forward? Does someone want to grab that more general topic to start?
I mean, I can probably start, at least say how we think about it in Iron Mountain. I think I think it's a really good question, first of all, because I think we all bring more of an analog or incremental view in terms of what the technology can do. So we've kind of attacked it from a couple different levels. One is for the senior executive team, we all have agents. And, that sounds easier said than done. We're one of the largest Gemini users globally, not just internally, but also what we do on behalf of our customers. But I think that what happens is when you force yourself to think differently of what's available on your laptop or on your tablet, it's a real game changer. So, first we're encouraging and cajoling the senior executive team to really embrace the technology and see what it's about. And it takes some change, right? Because, your first thing if I want a briefing on India, the first thing is we call up our geopolitical consultant and ask them for a briefing. It's a totally wrong approach because you can pretty much get everything that you wanted from that briefing document through Gemini, and you do it quicker. It takes less of my time. Obviously, it's both quicker and cheaper, but it's also less onerous in terms of the overhead of the organization. The other part is then for 600 leaders, critical leaders in the company, they all have a goal on how they transform the business under them. And again, this is about 35%, not 5%, in creating roadmaps to actually do that, because it takes a different mindset to really get the benefit out of what the technology can do.
That's awesome. Anybody else want to jump in on either the cultural or the data readiness?
I think AI is not a technology problem, or a lot of organizations have a chief AI officer, and I don't, from where I sit, sort of at the tip of the innovation with venture capital invested companies, I find that role will be very fleeting, and oftentimes it has no budgets and there is a lot of pontification. I think the most important thing is every member of the management team ought to be challenged to achieve the impossible, because actually AI is changing the mindset. And one sort of suggestion is look at the 20 sums in your organization. They're the ones for whom this will feel very organic, and there will be a clear divide between that type of talent and the rest of us, I include myself, where we are set in our ways. No one should go into a meeting. I mean, like, have your own sort of chief of staff agent. No one should go into a meeting without just getting a quick summary. It takes 30 seconds, and the depth, it's shockingly good. And as you do, you give the models more prompts, it becomes more effective. But fundamentally, when you have the leaders of the management teams and the boards that you sit at come and present to you, just say, where have you found efficiency? Where have you found productivity? And how are you moving forward to better engage with your end customer by leveraging AI? And I think if you make that part of the business, everyday inquiry, it becomes a business matter, not a tech matter.
Rob, you want to add something there?
Yeah, Radine, I agree with you completely. Some of the younger engineers are really teaching the older engineers. In fact, I believe every engineer is a system engineer in this new world, right? They're integrating larger systems with these new technologies, new tools, and a lot of that's being led by the younger generation. We did go through the cultural transition from leveraging these tools, lots of resistance in the beginning. Now we've been doing it for a while. Some of the leaders are stepping up, and now they're seeing real results, and it's filtering down. It's taken a while, but that resistance is kind of going away as people realize these tools aren't going to be replacing them, and they're going to be helping them. And so we're going through that transition. On the data side, we learned a lot of our data is not tagged with the right privacy, and therefore we're having to go back and re-architect some of our data strategy and data platforms to allow us to leverage that data more effectively with AI. That's a lesson we learned. We weren't ready for it, and we're having to go through and fix some of that now. So that was a challenge for us.
Rob, if I can come back to you on the people side, one of the questions here is, there's encouragement, there's board encouragement, there's management leadership and encouragement, and then there's just skills, right? And so to everybody's point is the younger people often are just doing it, but people who are already at some level of their career, and maybe they already have expertise in some particular areas, which now they're going to decide if that's even meaningful anymore. What is it that can be done, and can the board help in terms of the upskilling and the retraining that is probably going to be required here?
Yeah, we're doing a number of things. So you can do the basic training, go to a training class, et cetera. And that's fine. It's necessary, that basic training. But what we're finding helpful is we're establishing communities. So for example, we have an agentic AI community across the company. We get together monthly. We share ideas, best practices. We've got hundreds of people now participating, and that community has really been helpful at getting these best practices out across the company. And then we have an enterprise AI board that provides more strategy as far as the types of training, the types of collaboration. We're working with other companies and collaborating on enterprise AI technology. So partnerships, communities, and training are three areas that we're leveraging to get that knowledge out there.
That sounds good. Bill, did you want to add anything to that before I want to shift gears just in a moment, but before I go there, anything further on the skills and, readiness for the teams?
Well, I would just like go back on Rob's comment about the data is and maybe it's a plug for our own company because that's a big part of what we do now is that this platform that we built originally with Google and runs on the other clouds is exactly it is a pain point for companies is how do they get data into ready form, especially most companies are sitting on reams and reams of unstructured data. So how do you create enough metadata at scale without it requiring, tens of thousands of people? You still have to have a person in the loop sometimes, but we generally get over 97% accuracy in terms of being able to extract metadata because that's kind of the first step because you either have
Right.
to be able to tag it correctly from a compliance standpoint or be able to ingest it in a model so that you can use it. So it is, internal data and creating structure around unstructured data is a pain point that we have and our customers have.
Thank you. All right, Regina, somebody is counterpointing to you about your chief of AI officers. Do you want to take that question head on?
I'm happy to. I think a couple of thoughts. If you have a chief AI officer reporting to the CEO and with $1 billion budget a year to implement it across X number of areas, I stand fully corrected. The challenge is that a lot of the chief AI officers, who, by the way, are not the same as the chief digital officers or chief data officers, rather, they're now becoming two separate sets of people. They actually are supposed to be the evangelizers, the enforcers, but really don't have power. And therein lies the challenge. I think the biggest sort of chief AI officer right now is the CEO who sets the strategy. Bill has referenced 35%. Guess what? In every smaller meeting and department, everybody is going for that 35% because Bill said so, and he's pushing it through the organization. I think my concern around the chief AI officer, or even if it's a chief data and AI officer, is how much power do they have? Like Toronto Dominion Bank has a head of AI with literally $1 billion budget. And that person has his people embedded across the organizations in the business unit, dual reporting, and they're going for it. If that is the model, like I said, I am happy to be wrong and would accept that I'm wrong. Right now, the sort of head of AI in many organizations is sort of hybrid strategy, innovation, experimentation. And I'm not sure that, organizations are getting their value.
All right, I'm mindful of time and all the great questions that are coming in. So I think one of the things I wanted to just spend a minute on is this question of how much the board should be doing things proactively versus allowing the management team to kind of like take the run, take it and run. And sometimes there's an issue in terms of the board wanting to talk a lot about AI because it's such a hot topic and there's such an urgency around it. Any good advice that you guys want to share with the audience around the balance between how heavy-handed or hands-on the board wants to be here versus, kind of stepping back a little bit further?
I don't
I'll say a
think
couple
boards
things.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Rob,
go ahead,
please,
Rob.
by all means.
Oh, yeah, I think what boards should care about definitely the overall investment for this technology. And I think the ROI, or at least some discussion about ROI, I think is necessary. And the reason I say that is because you can do so much with this technology. You can build so much, but really you have to focus on where you're going to get the ROI. So I think that should be a board level discussion. Finally, I think any changes in workforce planning, global workforce planning, I think that is a board level discussion. So that's just a few examples.
Regina, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think boards and governing bodies are not in the business of running the strategy, delivering the strategy, running it, and executing. We're in a governance role, so I think where the responsibility falls for board members is to ask, we're executing such and such on this side of the business, great. Are we getting benefits from AI, rather than immediately go to the risk side? And the tendency is to go, okay, how is this exposing us? And that's a very, very good question. But I think we go to challenge the management team. Are we moving fast enough? Like I will often in my public boards ask the question, if tomorrow I give $5 million million to two guys or gals in a garage, and they started everything from scratch. How would they go about disrupting us? Where is our internal Tiger team as a large enterprise to go experiment, unfettered by the reality and the barriers that a large enterprise has to go disrupt, because it's going to come largely in that manner and very, very fast. I mean, I think about Iron Mountain and how, the data storage native type companies came about, or document storage like Box and Dropbox, that of course causes you to think forward, or like what Snowflakes and Databricks do. Like, it's interesting that you see multiple industries coming at it at the same time, not necessarily to disrupt each other, but some are having to disrupt themselves and innovate, as Bill has done, and in other cases they're starting with a clean slate.
Bill, this was your question, so let you wrap this one up.
Okay. Well, I actually, I probably agree a little bit more with Radina than Rob on this one, in the sense that, first of all, I don't think ROI is usually a hurdle for these things, because there's enough power in the technology. If you really lean in and understand it and have that 35 versus 5% mindset, you can always create freeboard as you go. Yeah, some of it takes a little more investment than others, but you can pick the low-hanging fruit, which creates more fuel, if you will, or P&L capacity to do the bigger or more expensive thing. So I don't think the ROI, and I do think from a board governance standpoint, is that it is making sure that you're pushing on what's the competitive landscape 3 years from now in your products and services, and how are you guys stacked up in terms of your competitive stance. And then the other aspect about it, some of these areas are so fast growing. So for instance, like in our case, is we went from a total addressable market for our products and services from 10 billion to 160 billion today, right? So that's the good news. The bad news is we're still roughly a little less than 7 billion in terms of sales. And so the thing that we talk about internally is our customers are not waiting for us to fill that white space. So if we don't actually grow, so it's not about growing, the mid-teens that we're growing right now in terms of top and bottom line, is that's not fast enough to make sure that we have a relative position that's defendable in some of these new product and service areas. So really thinking about how do you carve out, 3 years from now, a defendable moat, if you will, around products and services. And the landscape is changing super fast. So I think what Radina was saying, like thinking about, those people in the garage that are going to disrupt you, that maybe aren't as encumbered by what, you're trying to run your existing business as well as build a new business at the same time, which is hard. And the last thing I would just say on that is this is a struggle for every major company, because we're in the S&P 500. And I'll get the statistic wrong, but it's directionally correct, that in 25 years, only 25% of the S&P 500 will still be in the S&P 500. And it isn't because the management teams aren't any good. It's because trying to recreate new business models is hard, and business models are becoming shorter and shorter. So I don't even think it's 25 years anymore for 25%. It's probably like 10 to 15 years. And, innovation is hard. Building new business models is hard. And, but we all have to kind of think in those terms, and the speed at which that's happening with us because of technology is just getting faster.
Totally agree. All right. So mindful of Radina's need to, kind of wrap, I'm going to move us to a lightning round, in which I'm going to ask each of you to give one or two very, very concrete pieces of advice to board members and the people who are joining us today. And if you wouldn't mind trying to at least include a little bit, how can board members up their level of skills, their education, anything that you recommend that they do as at least part of the answer? So Radina, let's go first to you, because you're the one who will need to wrap.
Thank you. So I would say a theme that has come up several times here, as a board member, ask the management teams where AI can fundamentally change the business, both from a cost structure, productivity structure, or new areas for growth. I think it's time, and the maturity of the innovation is there for us to ask that question. I think clear governance on how AI products are built and leveraged should both inspire trust and an accelerant for adoption. So looking at it from that vantage point around the technology and how it's getting adopted and understanding it, should drive growth, not just risk considerations. And I think the third thing could be perhaps the last sort of the exchange that we had in the prior question, which is the biggest risk with AI is what your competitors will do with it to get ahead.
Great, thank you. All right, any thoughts on where the board can go for, kind of just general knowledge and expertise besides to your AI Atlas and all the other great Glasswing information that's out there?
Yeah,
where else can they go?
I think there are a ton of good podcasts, actually. So for your drives in and out, there's a lot that explains AI, but something can be very, very basic. Open a ChatGPT or Gemini 3 or one of those tools and type something and start playing with it. So have a bit of individual curiosity, because it will take you a long way in actually understanding how it all works. But Ellen, we can circulate a list of non-Glasswing, non-promotional, resources for people to listen and read. Happy to do that.
That's awesome. All right, Bill, over to you. What are some good pieces of advice you have? Bill, I'm sorry, you're muted.
I think Rudina made the comment, or might have been Rob, that it's more organic for the youngsters in terms of how they lean into the technology. I think as board members, we have to maintain a high level of curiosity. In other words, we need to come with the eyes of a child to this, which means you can't read enough, you can't experiment enough, like with Claude, Gemini, OpenAI, and others on your own to really understand the power of the tool. So I would say that's one thing. And that's up to us, right? I don't think there's a course that's necessarily going to do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to courses, but it's driven by deep curiosity about these things. I think the second thing is again, this maybe is repeating but different words, is making sure the company is bold in terms of the way it embraces it. The change management is really difficult because as human beings, we're not wired for two things. We're wired for incremental change, not transformational change. And the other thing is we're not wired to be uncomfortable, and the company has to become comfortable with the uncomfortable and the uncertainty. So I think as directors, we just need to make sure that the company is going through kind of they're not just saying the words, but they're going through the transition. And, leadership is generally not the youngsters, and so that makes it more difficult to get people like myself to change. And then I think the other thing is the counterfactual balance. I do think boards, because of their oversight and fiduciary responsibility, tend to focus more on risk and what happens if they get into the penalty box. But I do think making sure the company and the enterprise is future-proof for serving its customers in the future in a competitive or sustained competitive situation, I think is something that we need to keep that counterfactual balance alive.
Totally agree. And I just wanted to say, just briefly for myself, like I think of myself as a technologist, but I really have had to force myself to do vibe coding, right? Like there's a moment where you have to overcome that, like, oh, that's more work. I have to learn something, you know what I mean? And there is that moment. So it's sometimes being a little bit more like, yes, you do have to do those things, or at least pick something that you're excited to try. But anyway, Rob, over to you.
Yeah, so first of all, agree with Bill and Rudina. There's some training and education that's always going to be required in this fast-moving area. I mean, the way I describe it, that the half-life of knowledge in this fast-moving area is so short. You have to almost constantly keep up with this, and so I think that's always going to be part of what's needed on the product side. So when we build this technology into our products, that also. To Bill's comment about future proofing, there's future proofing you can do at the organizational level for how you build things and evolve the organization that way. Then, and for us in microprocessors, the products we build have to be future proofed as well. That means we need to include AI capable hardware and software that our customers may or not even use immediately, but they want it there anyway, because in the future they're going to use it. And we have to have the foresight to understand in these different industries how to future-proof those products. And that's a strategy discussion as well. And it's an investment discussion because you have to invest R&D to build these extra hardware components to future-proof our products. And this is something we discuss often is what areas and how quickly do we need to future-proof our microprocessors to support these different industries because they're moving at different rates and adopting this in different rates. And so that's a discussion we have often.
That's awesome. All right, I'm going to flip back over to some of the questions that are here. Although, wait, Rob, we got you on the lightning round. I just want to make sure we didn't miss you on that one.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Yeah.
You're good. Okay. I just want to make sure we didn't cut anything off there. All right. I think, like we had a lot of thoughts, when we were talking about this previously about things that a board could add to any kind of dashboard oversight metrics that are worth including. I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to kind of close out on that one a little bit in terms of what, if anything, should change in the board reporting or expectations that might be more helpful for the board and the management to kind of get aligned. Anything at all, or no? Keep it to the existing level of information.
I'll go first, but I think Rodina said it at one point in in the comments, is the board should still remain focused on outputs rather than inputs, right? That's why personally, I don't think they should have a dashboard on AI. Generally, if you need external advice on it, you probably need a technical advisory group rather than a board because it's hard to get a plurality of up-to-date board members around, the latest in technology to begin with. So I think boards should ask the questions to make sure we're future-proof as a company, that we're leaning into it in the right way. But the way to measure that is accelerated performance of the company, and however they measure strategy to make sure in 3 years' time the company is progressed to a point that it's more competitive rather than less competitive against the landscape that it operates in. So to me, it doesn't change radically. It may change the calibration of their current dashboards to make sure that the company is staying competitive.
Rob, thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I agree with Bill on this one. I think a dashboard with metrics is probably not the right thing for a board meeting, but a more strategic discussion about how we're going to create new roadmaps or products to support this evolution. I think that's a topic that comes up often, and that's something where more on the strategy side. I think the investment side as well for us, we're always having to make choices between what types of products we want to build for our customers, and that now includes part of that includes an AI technology discussion in our products, both hardware and software. Those for us are board level discussions, but we don't report on metrics per se.
Got it. Okay. All right. And then last question from me, and then maybe we'll open it up a little bit more, and ask Ellen Richton to get involved. But there's a whole new generation of people who are just joining the workforce. And, in some cases we've said, hey, they're the ones who are AI natives and, totally forward on this and all that kind of stuff. But they're having some trouble finding jobs, because there's some, concern about that in certain sectors. And they're also joining a workforce that's in this very big state of transition. What, if anything, are you guys doing? How are you thinking about onboarding of people, training them, bringing them in culturally? Like what are things that you guys are considering and might be board level issues?
So I'll start. Yeah, this one I actually have gotten into some arguments with our HR team on this one. It's easy to say, okay, we have this great technology. Now we don't have to go out and hire all these college graduates or software engineers, things like this. I disagree. I think this younger generation also understands a lot of the tools and techniques and capabilities that the older folks don't know. And I think so a healthy balance of new college graduates with what I'll call more experienced system engineers, combining those two together, I think is the right recipe for driving innovation. Not just trying to kind of train the older folks. I just don't think that's the approach. That's necessary, but not sufficient. So I think we may need to change how we hire, but and global workforce planning certainly is part of this whole strategy, but I just don't think we're making the right decisions by making blanket statements like we don't need to hire as many software engineers or hardware engineers anymore. I just don't think that's the right approach.
Bill, you want to add anything to this?
Well, let me add kind of like both on a personal side and then company side. So on a personal side, it is something I think about. So I have two kids at Carnegie Mellon. Our daughter's graduating this year in mechanical engineering. Our son is a sophomore who's an electric and computer engineer. And yeah, I hear this a lot. Our daughter luckily has a job already secured for next year, but our son, asks this question a lot because, generative AI, is going to replace some of these jobs, et cetera. And I know when I speak to the leadership at Carnegie Mellon, this is something that's on their mind. But I'm kind when I speak to other folks who hire a lot more graduates than Iron Mountain, they're kind of in the same place that Rob is. Actually, it comes back to people like me are dinosaurs, is you need the youngsters who are really leaning into the technology, understands what the technology can do, and then accelerating the growth of the company or the institution that they're part of using that. I do think, though, I'm not an educator, but I do think there's a disconnect because the way we're training people in universities is they almost aren't allowed to use these large language models. And that in the disconnect when I was speaking to a couple people who lead large global strategy consulting firms, and they want to make sure the graduates they're hiring understand how to use large language models because it's a huge productivity and it's almost table stakes in terms of their business. So I do think we have some work to do. I think that there's still this view not quite that you have to do assembler, but if you're kind of a computer scientist, you really need to be you need to generate all your own code. I'm not sure we're actually getting people ready for the workplace. So I do think I understanding the fundamentals, but I think education is a little bit behind what we need in industry. And then on a personal or on a company basis. So I do worry about our kids, like typical parent, and I want to make sure that they're set up for success. I think we're doing the right thing, but hopefully time will tell. I think on a company standpoint, most of our software engineers come with job experience, but I agree with Rob, and it's one of the things we're discussing internally. How do we bring more graduates into that fold? Because even someone who's 30 years old and a very experienced software engineer you're still teaching a dog new tricks many times, and we need to get that mix better. But it's also a cultural shift that we have to make sure that when we bring these folks in, that we're welcoming them. It comes down to inclusion. They need to be part of the conversation, not someone that just sits in the corner. So we have some work to do, but I agree with Rob's view. I think it's critical for us to again future-proof the company.
Totally. Yeah. And I have a daughter who is, first year in a law firm. And the expectation is she has to use the AI tools. It's not optional. And it would be great if, and wouldn't you be terrific if you brought that into the organization? It's like, you're going to need to know how to use these tools, and you're going to need to be able to do it in a way that is safe and, with the right output, and accuracy and stuff like that. But you better figure that out, which I think is actually, I think that's the right mood, right? For the new hires and stuff, is to help them with that. But all right, so I know we're going to start to run out of time, and Bill, I know also you have a time limit coming up. So if it's okay, Ellen Richton, if you're on the call still, I would love to hand it over to you and just make sure we didn't miss anything from the chat.
So I think you've caught most of them, Ellen, Ruben. But there are two things that Rob and Bill may want to spend a little more time on. One is there were multiple comments about enablers versus blockers. You're developing new products, using new technologies, and how do you even know, or how do you figure out where the blockers are and who are the enablers, so to make it actually work right internally? And the second, and it's sort of related, which is there are a couple comments about reverse mentoring. So you got the older guys who want to understand the new technology. And how do you get them educated within the company so that they can at least appreciate the opportunities that can come from using the new technologies? So I think there are 3 or 4 questions that all center around those, and I'm handing it back to you.
Well, I think on that last point, how do you? I mean, my suggestion earlier about pairing some of the younger engineers with more senior engineers or mentors and having them work together on a problem is one way we're tackling that. And it's so far it seems to be working pretty well. Specifically, I'll just to give an example, we're designing a new microprocessor and we're doing it in this new way of doing it. We're pairing some senior designers with some pretty bright college graduates that are experienced in using LLMs and other technology, and we're having them a much smaller team. And they're actually doing a really good job working together to create this technology faster than traditional, where we're kind of measuring this. And we found it's very collaborative. They're both learning from each other. The younger engineers are learning system level skills from the older and vice versa on the AI technology from the younger folks. So that I think is working pretty well. But so I think so we're going to do more of that. To the first point though on the blockers, yeah, I mean I'm not sure if what we did was the right approach, but we saw the whole distribution, right? The early adopters, the blockers, and everyone else in the middle. So the whole distribution curve. We were able to identify pretty quickly who wanted to leverage or use this technology. Quickly, we started deploying the technology to these folks that wanted to volunteer to use it, and then they ended up training the masses. The blockers were the ones that were always saying how it couldn't be done, but we went with those that were anxious to leverage this new technology, the early adopters, and then it kind of trickled down from there. That seems to be working. Some of the blockers are coming around. Some never will, but it's changed a little bit over time. It's improved.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Rob is saying is I don't think the blockers are maybe because I'm old, but I be careful of age bias on blockers, right? Because I find it in surprising area. I find many times blockers in the technology space that are fairly young, and when you uncover it or you dig a little bit deeper, you realize they're risk averse as an individual. And the problem that we've got is when you're doing these types of things, I'm not saying you take uncalculated risks, right? Because your brand and everything is really important. But people are not, it's not so much cyber risk that they're afraid of, is their risk of failure. And if you don't actually swing for the fences in a calculated way, you don't do that. So what do I mean by this is that, before I had this gig, I guess you could say I never keep a job. I've done a couple turnarounds in my career, right? Turnarounds are much easier because when the room's on fire, it's much easier to get people to realize they have to do something different and they need to open the door and go outside. If the company is kind of doing okay, but not well enough, because when you look out in the future, you realize it's not going to stay competitive, it's many times hard to create a burning platform. And if people are risk averse, they immediately become a blocker in terms of what you're trying to do. So, I mean, Iron Mountain was a 2% growth company, and now for the last 5 years, we're double-digit growth, top and bottom line, and not looking back. That transition probably took me much longer than it should have because there were folks that weren't willing to suspend disbelief and say, oh, we really can do this, right? So it wasn't like the company changed dramatically, but we created a cadre of folks that really said, we believe we can do this and it will be fun doing it. And the difficulty with blockers many times is even when you identify the blocker, the person's in a critical role. So what do you do about it? So it is difficult. But the only thing I would say is, at least in my experience, the blockers will surprise you. Sometimes it's not the dinosaurs like me. Sometimes I'm sure I am a blocker, but it's many times it's more about risk aversion rather than age or background or even education background in terms of where you find it. And it's hard because usually these people are critical to the organization for today's delivery, but they may be blocking you to get to the future that you need.
That's awesome. All right, Ellen, I think we probably want to wrap at this point. Maybe I'll hand it back over to Beth.
Okay. Well, first of all, Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, panelists. That was incredible. So informative, so insightful and well educated from each of your respective perspectives. What struck me is not only are we faced, and each of our companies faced, with how to adopt AI in all of our operational capabilities and capacities, but then how to change the management and oversight structure of that. And I thought that Bill's comments about risk aversion among some of those key bottleneck points is really, in many respects, it boils down to that human component and how we create transformational change in an organization that's been around for a long time, which is probably in many respects just as equally hard to do as to adopt and develop the technology itself. So with all that, thank you again. I want to highlight a couple of upcoming programs that are going to be really exciting, very informative for this group. On April 9th, we have two all-day events that I want to put in your cap, and they're at the bottom of this slide. On April 9th, we have an all-day Aspiring Public Company Director Program. And on June 4th, and that's open to anybody, current directors as well as aspiring public company directors. It's from like 8 to 5. By the end of the day, you feel like your head's going to explode. And then on June 4th, we have a similar set of topics, but solely for experienced public company directors. And we keep it small, like 25. So it's very peer-to-peer. So if there's anybody on this line who can be in Boston on June 4th for that all-day program, it is well worth your time. We get rave reviews from that program every single year, and this year will be no exception. We also have our 1 to 2 hour programs that we've got listed on this slide. For those of you who can make it, we will welcome you to that. And I also want to highlight in March a very, very special program that we are doing. There we are, with the Fletcher School at Tufts University on March 31st. It is going to be an exclusive global strategy retreat, embracing global uncertainty in the 21st century, transforming risk into a competitive advantage. This is the only global business retreat for directors that is an all-day retreat on global uncertainty in the United States, and it's done with a just world-class educational program over at Fletcher School. So we really encourage folks, again, this is a curated program. So if you are interested in that, if you sit on the board of a multinational corporation, you should be at this retreat. So sign up right away. Space will be limited. So we encourage you to do that. So finally, at the end of every program, we ask you, and then we ask you again and again, if you don't do it, to please fill out a survey. We take your responses seriously. They help formulate our future programs and our speakers. So we very much appreciate and are grateful for you not only being here today, but also filling out the survey so we can do great programs like this continuing into the future. With that, I think we're done, and we are very thankful for you, and we say goodbye until our next program.